She started Function and Flow to help teams and organisations work better, smarter and more effectively. In short, to do productivity differently. With over 2 decades of experience as an educator and project manager, it has taught her that industries and missions are as different as the day is long, but the foundational principles of getting things done are always the same. Get to the core, collaborate effectively, choose a path and commit. Her superpower is helping you simplify the process. And when she's not nerding out on this incredible work, her sense of balance comes from her best friend and husband, her home in the woods, her dogs who think you invented peanut butter. That's interesting. And albeit endless pursuit of slightly less bad yoga runner and musician. Kelly, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Nigel. It's really good to be here.
Yeah, I think we're going to be nerding out a little bit on productivity, so that'll be quite interesting. But then, the other thing is about bad yoga and running. I'm a bad musician, so yeah, we'll probably talk about things like that as well. Tell us, where are you, and a little bit more background from that.
Sure. I'm in central Pennsylvania in the States and have lived here for the last 20 years or so, and I'm a transplant from the Niagara Falls, Buffalo area of New York.
All right, cool. So let me get my geography working on my head. That's on the right-hand side of America and a bit down.
Yeah, right-hand side of America, very good, close neighbor to Canada.
Yeah, that's it. It's my geography of America times. Not so bad on that east and west coast, and not so bad. Once it starts getting in the middle, it gets a bit blurry from me. So I kind of have to have a bit more directions. So it's great to have you on, and as we said in the intro there, your background is project management. You and an educator, and you're obviously into productivity. And the listeners who have listened to me for a while will know that I'm kind of keen on doing as little as possible in the nicest way that is necessary to get something done. And I think it's ingrained in a project manager's mind. And I was talking to someone the other day about the fact that I find myself going around the kitchen making a cup of tea, and if I've got 2 things to do, it's kind of, what's the quickest, most effective route around the kitchen to do those sort of things, and you kind of just do it naturally. But tell us a little bit about your sort of background. You said you're an educator and project manager. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So I spent about 10 years teaching elementary school music. Loved it. And
Excellent.
Sort of fell backwards into nonprofit work from there. Loved teaching, but it was time to try something new. And I started working for a nonprofit and also volunteering for a nonprofit, and got a crash course almost immediately in volunteer management, whether that's staff managing volunteers or volunteer managing volunteers. It's a world unto itself, and I never looked back from there, and have spent the last 15 to 20 years in various forms of nonprofit project management, everything from working in volunteering in a maximum security prison, to working for a fair trade organization, to falling into conservation, which I've been in for the last 10 years and have just loved every minute of it.
Wow. It's an interesting area of management and project management. I've got a friend who kind of set up a charity, and I've talked to her about how different it is to managing people when they're part of their job. Can be difficult anyway, but when someone is giving up their time freely and you're trying to it's even more of the coercion that you need to be doing as a project manager compared to what you would do at an organization that someone's paid to do something there. These people aren't even paid to either, so it's kind of you kind of got to tread on eggshells, but then not. So I'd find it really hard.
I think it's fantastic. I mean, your only leverage is mission at that point. And if you can't deliver on a good exchange between time and mission-based deliverables, then they will turn on you in a heartbeat. But if you can find the balance and make it a good use of their time, and they feel useful. They feel like you're respecting the mission. Man, I mean, there's the potential is just endless.
I suppose, yeah. Thought about it like that. It's that whole stakeholder management key, isn't it? It is treating them slightly different in that stakeholders. They're such a key element to it, and being able to sell the project idea.
Yeah, I worked with fourth graders for a lot of my career and volunteers for the rest of it. And they have two things in common. One is that they have no filter. They will tell you exactly what's on their mind at any given moment. And the other is if they feel like you've made your case, they will work incredibly hard and just move mountains to make something happen. I mean, it's really incredible work.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, I've been a volunteer myself, and when even on small sort of different organisations, but I was UK chapter in PMI, I was on the board there and volunteering there, and it was interesting that actually there were a lot of motivated and invested people in trying to get something done, and that was through their own wanting to be part of it, I suppose. And then I've done things like parkrun. I don't. If you've heard of parkrun, it's in the UK. Well, it's worldwide, but it's a weekly 5K run. It's all free. It's around a park, hence the name parkrun. It's walk or run, and they've jettisoned in size. There's pretty much, I think you're probably 20 minutes away from a parkrun in the UK these days, because it started off in the UK down London, but worldwide it's expanding, and that is all volunteer based as well. You've got I think they've got like the core team, but even down to the things of people who run these events. They'll have event directors who are not paid, are just running these events because they want to run them, and you actually get volunteer t-shirts as much as you do for achievements for running around it as well. And I've volunteered a few times, and I found it really that and marshalling on other things is really satisfying, and really enjoyed it. And I was quite surprised, and I've heard it before from other organisations about what you get back as a volunteer, and it's surprising what that sense of community, which I think actually you feel. I feel stronger as a volunteer than as a participant. It's really interesting because it's, I don't know, it just feels different somehow.
Yeah. What made you keep coming back to it?
It just, do you know what? I keep going running. I don't volunteer enough is one thing I don't do. But I've always got it there. It's in my head of something I'm going to do at some point. Me and my daughter do it, and we just had fun and hopefully help someone else. I kind of think of it in that instance is if there isn't a volunteer, there isn't a run. So you've got 20 people who need to volunteer to do that. Same with any of the local 10Ks and stuff, which I've got a friend of mine who runs a few events around. And if you're not there, if someone isn't there, then the events can't run. And it's and it just feels like, well, yeah, you're kind of paying your dues a little bit, but there is not just that. It just is, it's good fun to see people work in that instance, having a run, pushing themselves, from people who are running 14-minute 5Ks to people who are taking an hour and 10 minutes walking the 5K. And they're just great to see people doing it.
I'm a terrible runner. I lose interest quickly. I am an angry runner. I'm injury prone, and I stop to pet dogs a lot. But I think every really good brainstorm I've had about project management and doing better work in that vein has come from being on a run at some point. So I can't give it up because it keeps flowing.
Yeah. I would challenge you on saying you're a bad runner. I don't think there's any such thing as a bad runner. It's that saying, isn't it? If you run 5K in 14 minutes or you run it in an hour, it's still 5K. Same with a marathon. It doesn't, we're all, if you run, you're a runner, and we're built to run as creatures. So, my view is there's no such thing as a bad runner. It's your run. It's stuff anyone else. It is your run. So it gives you what you need. I discovered, and funny, I was thinking about it the other day. I was out, this is I started running. I hated running. I'd done some running when I was younger, just didn't get it. because there was, well, I wasn't that quick, and there was no gamification of it for me. And but then I started running in 2013, and I was doing it to raise money for charity, because my wife had breast cancer at the time, and it was something I could do, something valuable, as in getting some money to be able to help with breast cancer research. And it gave me, and I started with it, and it's kind of, as you say, that mental clarity that you get from being out on a run, or actually just, I think it just taking you away from what you're normal doing, that thorny issue. It's that thing of where everyone's saying you get your answers in the shower or whatever. And I think you do kind of lose yourself a little bit by doing a run, and then you can kind of, you let your brain worry about something else, and then when that thing comes back, I always said I used to find really good stress relief when I started doing judo again, in the fact that if you're not paying attention to what you're doing, you end up on your backside. Yeah. So you tend to focus, so it means you do rest that brain. And so, yeah, I find it's quite funny when I first started that again. It was, I think I used to train Mondays and Wednesdays, and Monday was obviously the first day back at work, and everyone loves a Monday. If I didn't train on the Monday, I found Tuesday I was in a really bad mood because I hadn't managed to get over those Monday blues sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I think that whole, it's something I want to do at some point, is to pull, because I used to, the guy who runs parkrun in the UK, Tom, I'm going to get him on this show at some point, because I want to talk to him about how he's got, however many thousand people that they are managing, coordinating, and it's kind of not as a project manager managing 20, 30, 50 people. It's several thousand people every week to deliver the service every week around the globe. And it's kind of like, as a volunteer mission, it's kind of, how do you do that? And it's kind of what are the pitfalls in that. So I'm going to try and persuade him to come on one day. And
I hope you do.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting conversation. So, obviously, as an educator and going into the volunteers and doing that project management, do you find that it is the same skills that you would use in a for-profit organisations, or is the emphasis different?
It's almost identical. I almost think you need to be sharper working with volunteers, because like I mentioned before, they just will not tolerate you not being prepared for your job when they're showing up with just the mission as their sole motivation. But I think everything else falls in line the same way. You look at it as the purpose for being there, the goals you want to achieve, and then reverse engineering it from there, and all of the steps that you're going to take. That's no different with volunteering than it is in nonprofit land as it is in corporations that I work with. It's identical. Sometimes the pace is a little different, and the funding sure is different.
Yeah.
But the general principles are the same across the board.
Brilliant. When you say the funding different, I'm guessing it's depending on the different things I'm guessing you're going to have sort of cyclical funding, and you're going to have some organisations that have a batch of funding, and then they've got to go out and tender for more funding and things like that. Is that the kind of thing that the challenges you're talking about there?
Yeah, and I think that's a microcosm of project management in and of itself. Is a grant proposal, looking at what needs to get done in an organization to fulfill a mission, and then what do you need to fund it, because it doesn't grow on trees. So just figuring that out. But that's a process in and of itself, and really clarifying that project that you want to do. What's it going to accomplish? How are you going to get there? Who's going to help you? Because you can't do any of it alone.
Yeah. So how would you see that differing from or does it from a kind of the traditional, from my point of view, of a business case for a project? So you're kind of putting together your business case. I'm guessing there's a different people you're sending it to, but how do you see the differences between those two?
I think the biggest differences that I've seen between working in the nonprofit sector and the for-profit or private sector is just the speed at which things happen. So you've you've got your layout for the year. Usually with corporations, the decisions are just much, much faster.
Mm-hmm.
Quick. They know exactly what they need to do. They need you to come in briefly to help accomplish it, and it needs to be done in this amount of time. With nonprofits, it's not that the clarity is any less distinct. It's just because you have the idea first, usually before the funding. In a rare case, you get real lucky and you have a burst of funding that you get the high class problem of trying to figure out what to do with. But a lot
nice
of times,
problem to have.
Yeah. A lot of times you've got the idea and then you need to figure out how to make it happen. So whether that's pulling together the right set of partners, I work with a fair amount of larger nonprofits that still have very small staff. I mean, they still can't accomplish everything they need to get done just with the staff that's paid.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you're working with outside organizations that are volunteers. A lot of times, more often than not, you're working with outside organizations that have paid staff, but this is not their main thing. So you've got to figure out how to tie it into their deliverables for their actual job and how they can fit this in and help move the ball further down the field. But I think that's probably the big one is in corporations, the people are set, the partners are usually set, and the funding is usually there. In nonprofits, the funding is usually questionable. You got to go find it, make your case for it. Partners, some of them might be ongoing, but a lot of them you're going to need to figure out who's the right partner for this particular project. And a lot of times it's ongoing. Sometimes it's incidental, though. Sometimes one partner for this project and you never end up working with them again, even though it was great. So yeah, finding the right mix and the right blend to get the project up and moving and then to completion.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's just, you kind of think, it's an area I always look at and I think how I would manage in that area, and how I would, with that, whilst I tend not to do command and control with my management style, there is an element of that because of the role, power and things like that you're able to implement, whether it be on suppliers, whether it be on different departments and things like that, or different organisations. But I'm assuming, again, quite often you'll be in situations where you're going to have multiple organisations, non-profit organisations, potentially working together to deliver something, whether it's being something that you want to get kind of all of those organisations benefit from, or coming together to one mission for it. And then I suppose with some of the supplier side of it as well, you're going to get organisations that are helping and not charging kind of thing. And that's that people, I'm thinking, like, especially with the corporate social responsibility kind of thing, where an organisation say, we'll give you some of our people to come along and help you. Do you get that kind of dynamic as well?
Yeah, definitely. And thank goodness for larger corporations that have that built into their budget, to be a support to local nonprofits, and even larger nonprofits too.
Yeah.
But then there's the other piece of that too, where you've got partners coming in who have a marketable skill and a valuable skill, but that's their living, that's their livelihood. And the last thing you want to do is ask for that for free, even though it's for a really good cause. I mean, there's still a value in honoring time and energy and talent and making sure that there's a good exchange for that. Yeah,
because at the end of the day, part of it is that it's the marketing side of it, if you like, isn't it, with the CSR stuff in some ways, as well as I kind of sometimes look at organisations. There is a expectation for the corporate social responsibility to do things because that you need to be seen to be doing those things. And I imagine there are some organisations are just doing them to be seen. The organisations, you kind of draw it differently to the individuals, but the organisations in and of themselves won't necessarily see that as a priority for them. But the individuals may have a passion, and typically that's what you'll get. You'll get someone volunteering or whatever. And I suppose it's how I kind of have an old cynical view sometimes of thinking that people will, as long as they're seen to do it, they're okay. They're not really worried about the outcome as long as it looks like they're trying to get the outcome to be there. And I suppose you must have situations where that, if you've got that kind of organisation that's working with you that aren't really invested in what you're doing, they're invested in being seen in it, being involved with it. How do you manage that? How do you deal with those kind of situations?
I don't know that I've come across that all that often. Usually, if they're large enough where it's just a matter of being seen, they're not super interested in the follow-up. They'll write the press release, they'll do the promotion from their end, take a good picture, and be on their way.
Yeah.
That's not their main issue. But most of the partners that I've worked with over the years, whether they're large partners, small partners, or individuals, everything in between, there's a sense of belonging and ownership that's a part of a project, especially when you've got something good going. There was a project I worked on 2 years ago that converted a vacant lot to a huge community garden with a little bit of walking path. And the neighbors were part of it from the jump. And there were so many people and so many organizations, from the city to the stormwater management technician to the local grocery store to the local mulch supplier, who did their thing and showed up where they were needed, but didn't really need much beyond that. And all together, I mean, everybody gets thanked at the end, surely.
Yeah.
And in my world, it's always, handwritten thank you notes still go a long way. I know it's old school, but
Yeah.
I'll buy some stamps for those.
Yeah, I think these days that stands out, doesn't it?
But they come and they do what they can. And I think that's part of building a project from the ground up is talking to folks and laying out the whole picture. They don't need to be responsible for the whole plan or the whole map by any means. And God, I can't think of a better way to make someone go running for the hills than to say, this is the whole thing. But if you show them the map and they can see where they might fit, where their talent or where their skill or where their supply fits into the project, they're usually pretty quick to jump in and say, I can help.
Excellent. Maybe it's me, as I say, it's me being an old cynic. That's what it is. Maybe that's
I have
it. So,
my fair share.
my grey hair. I don't pretend I'm not an old git these days with my grey hair. So there we go. Thinking about sort of that's talked about your project management and your experience and things in there. And obviously you've got your, and for those of you who are watching on the video, you can see there that for those who aren't watching, there is a thing behind Kelly that says function and flow. And as I introduced earlier around productivity, and I said we probably nerd out a little bit on this. Tell us, what is your function and flow? What's this all about?
It's the culmination of 25 years of experience, and just pulling that all together and realizing that I wanted to teach again. So I love the intersection of people and project management. I think it is inextricably linked, and I think that link gets missed way too often. You get either way over-focused on just the people aspect, or you get over-focused on just the product and the deliverables and what we can measure from this. And when you weave them together, you can get so much more done, and the teams get stronger, the relationships get stronger, and that's where my heart just explodes. I love the work. And so I've started to do a fair amount of work with larger nonprofits and state agencies, mostly, but also some small nonprofits too, to really focus in on teams, small teams, getting projects off the ground, building better plans so that they have something great to work from that they can take and both run with immediately, but also use the same process to replicate down the road so that they don't need me. Again, they've got all the skills they need within their team. So that's what it was built for, is to help teams work better together, smarter, more effective, and just stronger together. I think that's the gist of it.
Oh, excellent. So tell us, what is the difference between, in your mind, the function and the flow then? Because I'm assuming that you have two things there, and that's probably I'm guessing that's going to be the crux of some of the conversation and some of the thinking about teaching it is kind of flow is obviously, I see flow as a number of things, whether it be process, whether it be being in flow state, and therefore from me as an individual, my productivity, but maybe it's something different from your point of view.
Yeah, it's very, very similar. I think the function piece is it's the structure. It's the foundation that you build it on. Some cases it's the strategy that you're building for a company, for a team, for a project that they're getting off the ground. And then the piece that comes after that is the strategy piece. Like, how do you actually turn what you just built, all of the goals and the vision that you have, into something that's actually workable, that moves you towards your goal sustainably? Because a lot of times you have a whole bunch of ideas floating around in a room, and maybe a handful of them are ones that people will actually take and run with long term. And that's what you're trying to do, is, that not have one explosion of ideas and energy and momentum just to conk out, 2 weeks down the road, when the momentum and the energy from that first workshop or that first meeting has waned, and now it's back to everyday business again. And so everything that you did just flies out the window. That's the last thing that I would like to have happen. So really building the structure, and then the strategy for how it acts. The strategy and the structure, and then the system for how it actually gets done.
Right. Yeah. So, it's funny because I've seen over my career a number of times where we've had sort of internal different organisations that I've been in with internal workshops to say, right, we need to do an improvements program. We need to do that, and I've tried to do improvements kickoffs and workshops myself as well. And I do find almost always there is that excitement. You get a big list of things. You kind of get people to boil it down to the most important ones. But typically I find there's too many. Because you sit there and look at it and you just go, well, all of that's important. All of that's good. Whether that's you're chasing something to help improve what you're doing, or whether it's to solve something that's a real pain in the backside, to get that out of the way. But there's always a big long list, and everyone in the room has a different focus and priority on those, and translating those really good ideas, because sometimes it's a case of, right, here's our list of problems, we're a team together, what's our list of possible solutions for those and our next actions, and then go out and do the next action. And people, a week later, some of the actions are not done. Quite a lot of them, people have gone, I was going to do that, but I couldn't get hold of so-and-so. And the week after that, you have an update, and it's kind of like, still stuck on that. And then you end up with that list of actions. And if you have an action point, you've got that update thing going still, and it's been there for 6 months, that action, and it hasn't been completed because of very good reasons. Whether it be time, whether it be not being able to get it, whether it actually is more complicated than we thought, all these different reasons for it, but you don't actually move forward. Some stuff does. I get that. Don't get me wrong. I think within that, and there might be the odd line that just goes bang, and that actually is taken and run with people. I know I've been part of initiatives where there was 2 of us, and we were really into doing this, and we were really keen, but then we just hit blocker after blocker after blocker to move it forward, and our energy waned, and then we kind of get it. And I actually, in the organisation I'm on about, several years later, that same initiative was reinvigorated in pretty much not the same way, but to get the same goal. But there was money put behind it, investment, because that's the other point as well, is sometimes that money put behind it. And when I say money, I'll mean time for people, because a lot of these things in organisations, we're going to do all this improvement. Well, I've got a full-time job, mate. I've got a full-time job. When am I going to do those bits as well? And how I'm really intrigued about how you that. I think the working out what you need to do in organisations, you've got lots of very clever people. You've got organisations that know their business. They know what they're doing. If you give them the time out to actually work it out, they can work out the answer quite often. Sometimes you need to bring in a few consultants or whatever, but typically those people in your own organisation know what they're talking about. But how do you move from there to actually getting these initiatives off the ground? and kicked off and delivered and giving benefit back and that feedback loop into the organisation? How do you do that? I'm not giving up all of your secrets, and that I'm guessing that you do in your workshops and kind of there. But what sort of thing? What were the key things that you'd be talking to organisations about, or what do you see as the key things that stop it? And are there any specifics that organisations could do to solve that?
Absolutely, that's such a good question. But you made me laugh when you said money, and the money is people's time and the time that has to go into this new project. And it made me laugh because my last boss, I had to build out what she was asking for in a pie chart at one point for me. And it was 2.5 pies was what all of the numbers came out to. And she still would not acknowledge that that is not humanly possible. But you really do have to we are optimistic at math, just wildly optimistic. And I think what you were talking about a little earlier about, you have these two people who work really well together and you're really into the project and you're going and you're going and you're going, but all of these different things come into play and for whatever reason keep it from happening. And that tends to weigh people down. But I do think that there's a piece of our meeting structure that's just not built for that kind of conversation. And that one I think is so important. So accountability is a big one for me, partially because I think it only gets 2 hats that it gets to wear. You either get a ribbon and a trophy, or you get sent to the principal's office. And there doesn't seem to be any middle ground. And in my mind, accountability is everywhere. It should be part of every single conversation. And not because you did or didn't do something, or did something 30% of the way or 70% of the way, but to help figure out when you're in a room, in a meeting with your peers or with your team or with external partners or whoever, you have a lot of brain power in that room when you can openly talk about what went well, what's making its way, but much, much slower than we thought it was going to be, or what's just dead in the water. Why is this happening? And because the 2 people working on it are so close to it, they're frustrated, they're spent, exhausted, they're aggravated because it's important to them to get it right, that it can be hard to see past that to what's actually getting in the way. And if you've got a couple other folks in part of that project who can see it from the outside and help sort that out, then you can see what the last part was that got done, the next part is that you're trying to get to, and then break that down into tiny, tiny micro steps. And there's 2 reasons that works. One is small steps are just going to be easier than the giant leap. It's just fact. Yeah. But also, momentum is small wins. It's very similar. Like the jolt that you get from a small win is almost identical to the one that you get from the moment when you get a big win. Is as far as how long they last and how much momentum you get out of that, it's roughly the same. So if you're having trouble getting to that next piece, breaking it down into however many small steps that you need in between, just to start the ship moving again, just to get the rudder going, have one small win leads to another one, leads to another one. You're still going to have hiccups. It's not a panacea by any means, but it does sort of retrain your brain in the way you're looking at the problem, to just break it down and look at it a different way so that you can start solving each individual piece along the way.
Yeah. I like that. It 2 things there, kind of 3 things it's made me think of there actually. One of them was that I was listening to a podcast, the Running Commentary podcast, and it's about running, and it was it's a comedian, Rob Deering from the UK, and he was doing, I think it was Brighton Half, or it might have been Brighton Marathon, quite late on in the run, and someone handed him a piece of paper, and he's kind of, oh yeah, thank you, kind of bit dismissive, because they were handing out the little motivational things, and on the piece of paper it said 1 more step. That's all it said on that piece of paper. And when you look at a run, any run, whether it's long, especially when you start doing marathons and things like that, it is 1 more step. That's all it is. There isn't, especially when it's hard, it's 1 more step. When it's easy, you can think about another mile. When it's hard, focusing on the next step. And it's kind of the trust the process conversation that I've heard before now, of kind of, if you know what the process you're going to be doing is, you know you'll get there, just do that one more step. But it makes me think about...
This is one of my running brainstorms. You run the hill first. Fresh legs. Get the lay of the land. Don't make changes just yet. Understand what the hill feels like to all the people who've been working on it before you got there. But then, I mean, what you're talking about, when it gets hard, my version of this, there's a part of my run where I just tend to question all of my life choices. I do the same loop almost every week.
Yeah.
And there's just like, why I'm just going to stop. And instead, it's this lovely little portion of my run where there are 47 trees. Why it's not symmetrical just blows my mind. But it's 22 on the front end, and then, 25 on the second half. And I just count the trees as I go. I count up to the middle, and then I count down to the end. It drives me batty that it's not the same amount of trees on both sides, but I've learned to live with it. But I apply that. I actually use that same metaphor when I teach new project managers, emerging leaders, just the basics of this, because count the trees is essentially step by step, one more step.
Yeah.
Get to the next tree, Don't look towards the end. We're not talking about another half mile at this point. We're just talking about the next tree. Just get there and then keep on going.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, is you've got to trust that you've got what you've got to do next sorted.
Yeah.
And sometimes actually the next step is work out what the next 15 steps are. That might be your next step.
Yes.
And that's the thing, is something, well, I don't know what the next 15 steps are. It's kind of, well, no, because you haven't worked out what they are. So what do we need to do to work out what they are? And it's the whole thing of a work breakdown structure. And I get another analogy with my daughter. She's doing her exams at the moment, her GCSE, and I put a photo on LinkedIn the other day of us with a whiteboard and the weeks marked out and sticky notes on it. And we kind of put just arbitrarily, I think it was where we were and how long it was to her first exam. And then we decided, right, so that's the gap, and we do work back from that exam 3 days, 2 days or whatever, work back. And then we did that for all of the exams and moved them all back. And what we found is, because there's a big rump of exams at the end, there was lots and lots of stickies all together at the same time. And I kind of sat there and went, we've got a work breakdown structure there. Now that's what we've done. We broke it down into, right, okay, so you've got the chemistry exam, you've got 5 bits, you're going to do 1, 2, there's 5 of them. Some of the estimates, and the whole thing was just a project scope you and planning meeting that I realised that we do exactly the same sort of thing. And it's just, what's the next step? Well, you don't have to think about the exam in 2 weeks. You've got that part of the revision to do. And so you don't have, because that's the whole point of it. It looked like a lot of stuff on there, but it was a case of, well, don't worry about that. What are you doing tomorrow? What are you doing the day after? And you had that there. And it makes me think about and we'll talk about this, how your experience of using Agile and things like that, maybe whether you've got using any of the Agile techniques within some of your deliveries, that again, that getting it down to the smallest portion, where you're elaborating, you have a piece of work and it says, right, okay, we're going to do that piece of work. Okay, so if someone can't do it in a day, it's not detailed enough for us to understand what it is. So the first thing we've got to do is break that down into something that we can understand and we can estimate and we can get a feeling for the scale and size of it. Maybe it's not the day, I'll probably get shot by the Agilists on the way that I interpret it, but my view of it is you kind of just break it down into whatever, what is manageable by the team, so that someone can pick that piece of work up, be allocated to that piece of work and do that piece of work. Again, for me, it's in a smaller microcosm. You're doing the same as you would do if you're doing a massive work breakdown structure in a project plan for a whole waterfall project. Agile you use within inside of it. What from your point of view, how have you found use of Agile type of techniques? Or that whether you tend to be in these organisations, they tend to be the more traditional sort of deliveries?
I think if I said Agile in most of the rooms that I'm in, I would have a lot of deer in the headlights.
Okay.
So we do a lot of, I do a lot of visual collaboration when it comes to project management.
Hmm.
Getting everyone in the room who's often from, the most recent one I did was a group. There are four large organizations that work together to steer the entire project. But then there's
Yeah,
close to over 24 smaller partners that all participate in it.
that's a big
So
group.
it is a big group, and they all have different interests. They're spread across a 185-mile stretch of a conservation landscape. So their interests are different. Their sectors of the economy are different. Some are
Yeah,
tourism, some are education, some are land protection. But putting it in, visualizing the thoughts is just, it's so important for getting things out. And then for me, I think the piece that I take from Agile is the retrospective. I don't think you can live without
yeah,
it. I
yeah,
I don't know how it's not just commonplace to look
yeah,
at what you've done, go back and take a genuine and objective look at what happened here, and so that you can both improve on it if you're still working on the same thing, but also use that knowledge going forward, whether it's with your work, whether it's in another project that you're sent to work on with another team or another department. I think the reflection period, the retrospective, is invaluable in moving
yeah.
forward, and it makes such a better use of the time you've spent working on this project. Take all of that and take it out into the world and use it on the next thing.
Yeah, it's that lessons learned thing that, again, put me cynical hat on. So we have, you'll sit there and you'll go, right, you'll deliver a project. It might be 6 months, it might be 9 months. You do a lessons learned meeting where the people who are at the beginning of the project aren't there anymore because you've done all your analysis. The people who are there at the end are the ones that had to get it over the line and were annoyed with it. You know what I mean? You've got such different views of different people in there. The only constant is potentially the project manager. If they hadn't got kicked off because they were doing so, you might be a new project manager in there. You don't know what happened for the first 3 months, and the customers might have changed, or all these different things that happen. And that lessons learned document actually is then written. It's a Word document. It's thrown in a drawer. It never gets picked up and used again, except for the person who vaguely remembers writing it and trying to pull the knowledge out of people in a workshop where they're just glad they're at this bleeding project's over and they're moved on to the next one. It's just, it doesn't work. The frequency and the speed of the retrospectives in the Agile, I think, is fantastic. To be able to sit there, and I've had some improvement projects. I try to use kind of Agile techniques from a point of view of that, but not running it Agile. So again, I kind of said, right, we'll have a in quotes sprint, but we'll have a time box, really, is what we did.
Yeah.
And at the end of the time box, we'd have a retrospective and we'd have a planning session for the next time box. And it's the iterative thing, and I badged it with all the stuff. But I found those retrospectives really useful because that 2 weeks in, you find out why, like I say, my colleague that we were trying to get that stuff, 2 weeks in, if you have that in there, you go, why haven't we moved any further forward? Oh, it's because this isn't going very well. And they'll keep doing, stop doing, do differently kind of conversation. Those three questions, and when you think about that, it's kind of, why didn't that happen? Oh, because of X. Okay, so how can we change that? And you're doing it there, you're steering the ship early rather than trying to handbrake turn it at the end. And it's kind of that flow through there makes life easier, I think, then. Because you are tweaking and adjusting at the same time. And I suppose that conversation, it's funny because a lot of this stuff is common sense, and it is stuff you would do if you thought about it, and it makes absolute sense. There's no rocket science most of the time. It's just a case of, right, we're doing stuff. Let's work out what the details of the stuff we've got to do are. It's like cooking.
Yeah.
We do it in a recipe. Cooking from a recipe is managing a project. you've got a set of instructions. You've got a set of materials. You follow the instructions in order. Some things you run in parallel because you're cooking Sunday lunch. my podcast title, you're doing a lot of things all together at the same time. You've got to bring them together all are the same thing, and it is. And as you're going through, you're kind of going, as a chef, the people who are out there as chefs, they'll be tasting. That's your retrospective, isn't it? Hang on a minute, there's something wrong with what I've done there. I didn't put enough salt in. Right, adjust and change. So again, that kind of analogy, I've only just thought about really properly. It kind of draws the line.
Yeah, but you've also just described with that metaphor the dependency, the complexities of dependencies, and figuring out, because sometimes where things are going off the rails, and you talk about the flow, I actually, when I teach this, I call it the bottleneck meeting. There's 3 meetings that I teach to try to avoid, or if you're having them, here's how to fix them. And the one is called the bottleneck meeting, and that's the one where the dependencies are just unclear, and you don't bring enough people into the conversation either early enough or frequently enough, or you've brought them in with the wrong set of expectations. But if you're tracking that as you go, you can solve some of the dependency issues in the first or second stage of the project when you realize that there is a delay specifically because this person was not brought in to begin with, and so your design had an issue that had to be redone, which caused a delay, which there's all sorts of problems that you can solve if you keep assessing as you go, but that comes back to that issue of accountability and not having any middle ground between the trophy and the principal's office. There's plenty of middle ground there, and it actually helps projects run more smoothly and pull people in so that they're in the room, at the right people in the right room at the right time. You can do so many things. I mean, if you don't have everything on the grocery list for Sunday lunch, you're stuck at the gate. Or you have to really go rogue with some seasonings.
Yeah, absolutely. I've done that before when I was a student. Well, I always had garlic, and garlic was my friend. You can hide a lot of sins with garlic, I found, and spice up some very cheap beans that I used to buy. It's interesting with that that sort of approach of, as you say, the difference between the principal office and the gold star and all that sort of, and the ribbon, etc. It makes me think about the fact of that it kind of talks about that bit in the middle is the we feeling, isn't it? It's where that, and you talk about mission, and it's probably in some ways you'll get more people invested in the mission of what you're trying to do, and I'm paraphrasing here a little bit, than maybe in some corporate situations. And therefore that blame game doesn't come in. If that blame game doesn't come in, you haven't got those two extremes, and what you get is, right, we're having our meeting, we're having a conversation, something's not right, what have we got to do? What have we got to do? Not what have you got to do? What haven't we done, rather than what haven't you done, or what haven't they done? And that's where I think that, for me, that's where you start getting, right, okay, how do we solve this as a team? It doesn't matter that it was me who made the error, very likely. It doesn't matter to the team that an error is made, or something didn't finish on time, or we missed something. It's an owned, that accountability where we all feel ownership of it, and we all think, right, okay, we're all going to miss stuff. There is going to be things we don't know, and we're all going to get it wrong. Okay, so that's change, right? How do we, as a group, solve the problem? It's that, I know it's kind of a bit of a cliche thing. It's the Apollo 13 scenario, when that group of genius engineers are in that room going, we're going to make that fit into there. How do we do it? It's not because they had the designers who built it, the people who did it. It's kind of like they've got all the experts who built those machines, that craft, and understood all the bits that they had. And there wasn't ramifications of whose fault it was. It was a case of, what do we do as a team to solve this problem? And I think that's the difference, isn't it? That's where you get that brilliant, powerful teams who can really energize. And when you've got that culture and that shared mission, it makes it so different.
I think too, when it starts with whoever the leader is, for that team. And I know in some teams it's very flat hierarchy, but there's always somebody in the room who's calling the meeting. When that person can acknowledge a shortcoming or a missed skill on their part. I was just reading an article about GitLab the other day, and their manual has bios for senior staff that include all of their personality flaws, how to best overcome those. And they're notes that were written about people who worked for them just to make it easier on everyone. So when you can sort of weave in that personal fallibility, it just takes some of the scariness out of the accountability piece. And when you can start having those conversations and normalize them, you start building in trust and empathy over time instead of just expecting it to appear when there's a huge problem and you haven't done anything to cultivate that over time. It's like how I deal with my garden. I don't pay any attention to it. And then I'm like, why didn't it grow? I'm not very good at it. But with people, if you can tend the team just constantly in small, tiny ways, those things build on each other. And all of a sudden you have, without noticing the small incremental growth over time, this culture of trust and empathy for each other, which, just like you said, results in solution finding instead of blaming, which is really just a waste of time and energy and precious resources.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. It can. And I've seen it in situations where those blame and escalations, and then both sides become defensive, and it's a he said, she said scenarios between, whether it's between departments, whether it's between the organizations I've worked with and the customer. It just ends up going, you just kind of got to get to that point where someone's got to go, right, okay, let's solve it then. I'm sorry, I'll take the blame. Let's solve it now. Do you know what I mean? Sometimes people, I kind of want to do that before now. I've gone, it's my fault, my organisation's fault. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, we need to solve it. It doesn't change some of the commercial situations, and that's when it starts to get gnarly, but it's kind of our fault from a point of view of, yes, we made a mistake, or maybe we've had an error, and then how do you fix that and try and move past it? And sometimes people just want to go, we could have done better. Someone to say, we could have done better. And then they go, right, okay, you've acknowledged it, let's get on. And there's no, that's it. That's all. Sometimes all people want is an acknowledgement that my bad.
Yes.
And that's it.
Yeah. And the longer you withhold that, the more it escalates. Yeah.
Well, you get it with relationship issues where you have a misunderstanding with a partner, and you'll have one of you or both of you kind of stubbornly not acknowledging the fact that you could have been partly to blame for it, and then you kind of go, right, okay, my fault, and then you can go past it then, can't you? And life's so much nicer after that, isn't it?
It really is.
So I'm just looking at the time. We've been chatting away now for a good 50 minutes or so, and we haven't even dug into productivity in my head yet. And just going to ask you a really quick question on productivity. If you, with the teams and organisations that you're looking at, if there's one thing, I know you mentioned before the from the dependencies point of view, that bottleneck meeting, but if it's, say, for individuals or actually organisations, whichever way you want to play it, if you were going to give an organisation one thing to do, or an individual one thing to do differently than they might be doing now, to improve their productivity, what would it be?
I feel
You're only
like
allowed one.
I got this. I feel like I'm on a game show where I got the one question I know how to answer. It's next steps. It's the last thing you do in a meeting, and it's the thing that gets bulldozed over. I'll go with 99% of the time. Next steps. So what I start every meeting with, and what I teach people to start meetings with, is what's going to be different as a result of us coming together. What's the purpose of this meeting? Just so it's clear, it helps you keep things on track much better. But then there's the other half of the bookends that hold it all together. The other half of the bookends, which is this promise of progress. I gave you my time, I gave you my talent, I gave you these resources. What's going to happen as a result? What's going to be different by the next time we meet? And setting aside, my benchmark is usually 15% of your meeting needs to be the next steps. What have we decided on? Who is responsible for what and by when? And then we're all in agreement on that. It's usually in a shared space, so it's easy to get to. Ideally, I love the little interactive workspaces where you can move things around and mark them at different statuses. It just makes it's the physical joy of checking something off of a list.
Yeah, it's
But
like
I think
the Kanban boards are moving things across,
yes,
isn't it? Yeah.
sometimes you put things on a to-do list just so you can check it off. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's next steps. I think there's so many meetings that you walk out of having had a good discussion, even some that are unproductive from the jump, but some that are really useful and really good conversations and discussions, and you're headed in a great direction. But then everybody walks out the door or the virtual door, and nobody actually knows what was supposed to happen. So the next meeting, you start in the exact same spot because there's just no clarity around what was supposed to happen next and who was going to do it. And that's where that accountability piece comes into play again. When that's clear and transparent, that we know exactly what's on deck for next time, when it's going to happen, and by who, you can keep track of that. And that, again, solves some of that dependency issue where things tend to go off the rails a little bit. Because everybody knows what's expected. I can't do this until this is done, so I've got other work I can do. I can focus on that. And people feel a lot less like their time is disrespected or not valued, or at worst, wasted, either waiting for things or doing work that is, God forbid, the thing that wasn't actually asked for. You spend tons of time on it and you hand it off and they're like, what is this? We decided not to do this, but it was unclear. So now you've got a whole new set of problems. 15% of every meeting, next steps.
Yeah, you made my skin crawl then with those last two comments before that. The thing of doing things that are unnecessary and just drives me batty. I sit there go, I don't think there's any value doing that, and it's just sometimes it's and then when you've done something and you've invested a lot of time and and again when you start talking in your sort of world with the volunteers where you've asked someone to do something and they've gone off to do something that they're doing in their own time and then come back going, oh nice, but we didn't want that. I can imagine how people feel in those scenarios. It would just drive them crazy. At least when you're in a job and you're getting right, you go, well, those 2 hours I was paid. When you're not being paid for it, when you're giving up time with your family, when you're giving up from your own hobbies, and then it was of no use. That waste of effort and waste of time is something that it's something that really, that waiting for someone drives me crazy as well. It's something I've got to work on. It's one of my problems. If I'm I find myself that lean, when you look at lean organizations and how they look at removing that waste time in there. And I know I've been in organizations who've spent a lot of time doing lean, but there is still big holes in all of our lives where we're waiting for some swear word else to do something. I don't usually stop my stuff swearing on this show anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But yeah, those things just drive me absolutely crazy. And it kind of, the next actions, the next steps are, because I've always had this thing with action logs and meetings, and the first thing you do is look at the action log and review the ones that no one's done, or if they have done, they haven't thought about doing it until you start talking to them about it in that meeting at that time. I've been guilty of doing it. I know everyone's been guilty of doing it, and it's not unusual. Yeah, it's kind of like you go there, right? Oh yeah, I'll get that, and then the rest of the world just smashes you in the face, and a week later you go, oh, ferrets, as you look at that thing going, I should have done that. So either, if you're lucky and you've read it before the meeting, you remembered that you had to do that action, and now good behaviour is that you take those actions as soon as you've got it, you write it in wherever your calendar is and what you're going to use, decide when you're going to do it, plan it, and all that sort of thing. I think one, actions kind of has a bad rap. But it's fundamentals, isn't it? Really, it's fundamental meeting management. And I had a organisation called Templo that we were sponsoring the show for a while, and they have a thing with better meetings, and it's all about that. It's all about those managing those actions, managing when people are meant to do it, integrating that into people's time management system so that it happens, so it's automatic, so it's not on that Word document at the bottom with last updated dates of, or where you end up having a date when no movement, and it ends up being 20 pages long of one action where it's no movement.
Yeah.
And I think the things that the next steps and working out how you take that tooling of those next steps as an individual, and I think it's something for all of us to do, is if someone gives you an action, record that action somewhere and make sure you remember you're going to do it, and schedule that action in your diary for when you're going to do it. Don't wait for the minutes to come out. We should be taking our own notes. We should do it. And that's one of the things. Now, the tooling that we've got in there, the Microsoft Loop stuff in Teams and things like that, brilliant. Now, I haven't quite got it working for me and people who I work with, but I can see how we can use it and how you can integrate all these things together. Again, working with, in your organisation, I imagine when you've got volunteers, they're not going to be all on the same IT. You're not going to have all these organisations using the same, so it becomes harder to do that. And those next steps, I think it just sounds like a good way of formalising it rather than actions. I have an action. No, it's the next step that we're taking in this process. It's just the next steps we're doing. It doesn't feel as you say, you're not going to get told off for not doing your actions. It's just the next step that someone needs to do.
Well, I think you just brought it full circle back to people. You talk about volunteers are not on the same tech. No, they're absolutely not.
No.
And they will resist certain tech with every fiber of their being.
I have that in the household.
You can try to force it, but it's not going anywhere. So figuring out where they are, meeting them where they are with whether it's an email, whether it's a phone call. I know that sounds nutty in this day and age, but sometimes a phone call will get you everywhere.
Well, the thing is, people answer the phone these days because it's unusual.
That's true. Yes.
Yeah, do you know what I mean? We're all instant message, aren't we? It's so many organisations. Your WhatsApp groups are your powerful tools. They're really good communicators. Your Slack groups and all that. And I've got very good friends that's who we talk to about for ages, and then we meet up in the pub and we have a good chat. But we won't necessarily pick up the phone to have a chat because that isn't. You don't think about that. And same with work as well. I've got IM and Teams meetings and things like that where you will. I won't.
It took me forever to embrace Slack. I
don't get Slack. It's not in order. It's not. It's just all over the place. And I looked at it and my brain melts.
I totally agree with you. Yeah. But I have a group that I work with right now. All of their communication is in Slack. Yeah. And it's my fault. I asked them to vote. That's what they voted for. And I was like, oh, really? Really? Are you sure? And they were really sure. So,
yeah.
That's where they are. That's the way we communicate. And man, are they good at it. We get so much done so efficiently. Yeah. But if I had the exact same communication tool for a different group, we would get nowhere. Just absolutely nowhere.
You've got to match it to the individuals, haven't you? It's the important that tooling, and I think it's I've noticed it recently where the more different types of tool, the more like email is the weapon of choice for people a lot, and corporate organisations still is that weapon of choice. It still is a poor weapon because any of them that are in text, they're a poor weapon as far as I'm concerned, but because misunderstandings are dead easy then. Voice, this kind of conversation, much easier to understand what the other one's talking about and whether they're serious, silly, or confused. And whereas on text, you can't. You always put your own interpretation on it. And
What's your the thing that you use with the "Who stole the milk"? What is it?
Yeah. It's I never said she stole the milk. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, and
I'm still gonna borrow that at some point.
Fine. I don't know who I stole it from. But to highlight, I talk. I probably mentioned it. I always talk to my daughters on that when they first go on their phones, so that they still don't, because they still have little well, she said this, and then there's a load of intonation on what the words are on the text. And I'm kind of, no, she didn't. She might have said this. And it's kind of like, oh, yeah, it might have been different. Yeah. So, because we all do it. We always put our own filter on, and that filter's terrible.
We do dramatic readings of texts in my house.
Oh, good God, yeah, I've seen that before. Yeah, I'm sitting there when you hear someone reading that, and it's kind of it's like a Shakespearean play, and it's a 4-word text, but the amount of gravitas put on certain words, and you sit there going, hang on, no, could it mean this? And it's kind of, oh yeah. If you change the emphasis, could it have meant that? And you go, oh yeah, never thought of that. It's just crazy. And the same with emails as well. I've had it before now where I've read emails and thought, you cheeky mother, and then gone, hang on, actually stop myself. It's highly unlikely someone wrote that in that way. Think about it again, and then go back. And hopefully when I've written ones where I'm being that acerbic with people that they've not realised. But who knows? You've been giving me so much time, and I think we could probably chat about different things on this till the cows come home and bring the milk, in fact. But I know you've got more to do today, and it's getting late here for me as well. Kelly, it's been brilliant having you on the show. I'm sure that there's something that we've missed. Is there anything that you would have wanted to tell the listeners if you had a chance that I haven't asked, because I've gone down too many rabbit holes?
It's been so much fun talking to you. I just come back to relationships are everything, and keeping that balance between people and project management is just square number one.
Brilliant. And so if people wanted to find out more, get in touch, what's the best thing to do?
My website is great. It's findfunctionandflow.com, or LinkedIn. I'm at Kelly S. McGinley, or Find Function and Flow too. So either place is great.
Brilliant. Well, again, like I say, thank you very much for giving me so much time this evening for me, this afternoon for you, and have a brilliant rest of your day.
Thanks, Nigel. You too.
Cheers now.
Bye-bye.